Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, which is with my special guest, John. So let's just make sure John is alive and kicking. You there, John?
I am here, David.
Good stuff, good stuff. Glad to hear about it. Just checking that everyone can hear John and see him. You do look frozen there, actually, on my display, John. But we can hear you. Just say something else.
Okay. Hello, I'm here. Happy to be here.
Good. Excellent. That's good. Let's just try John on his own. There we go. Oh no, we've got John in perpetual frozenality, but
Oh no.
I think we should be all right. Excellent. All right. Anyway, before we get back to you, John, I'm just going to give a brief introduction. And then we should be all good. So 1 second. Just to let you know who I am, if you haven't joined the webinar before, my name is David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen. And as usual, we have 60 minutes of our time today, or at least a maximum of 60 minutes. If it's half an hour or if it's 45 minutes, that's also good as well, but that's the maximum. You are very welcome to submit your questions at any point. The way you do that, we get to in a second. There's also the chat room, which you guys, or some of you guys, have discovered here as well. Now, if asking questions and chatting is your thing, then you'll see the first tab is all about the chat room. And that's public chat, just so you're aware. So anything you write into that room will also be put up for everyone to see as well, just so that's important. If it is quite busy today, so if you want to ask a specific question, you're better off adding your chat to the Q&A or going directly to the Q&A itself. And then that way we can see very specific questions. Now, if none of that is interesting, then of course you can hide the chat window just by clicking on that small right hand arrow. That will hide it completely. The one next to it means it will just float it in a separate window. So let us begin. So let's go back to Frozen John. And so we should be able to see.
I hope I'm
John,
frozen in at least like a flattering picture. It's not just like some awkward facial expression.
Yeah, it's frozen in a relatively flattering pose, so
Okay.
that's the main thing. So even though you're not moving, it's actually a good pose. It could be a lot worse actually. So we'd be thankful for that. Obviously, we're not just going to look at your face. We're going to look at your screen on Capture One as well, and look at the sort of stuff that we can do in styles and so on. But just coming back to your frozen face for a second, just a little bit about yourself before we move on. So you're currently based out of Los Angeles. I've got that part right, I know.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, good. And
Yep.
what sort of clients are you shooting for these days, if you give us some background on that?
Sure. Well, I'm lifestyle fashion photographer. I'm shooting mostly small to mid-size, some larger brands, clothing, footwear, apparel. Most of my clients are say lifestyle beach type things. It's not too much along the lines of streetwear or anything like that. It's mostly just Southern California lifestyle type stuff. And some of my clients would be there's some handbag companies that I work with.
I'll
probably
just put up your screen on the feed so people can see that as well, as opposed to just your frozen face. So,
my frozen face.
But at least we can look at something slightly more interesting than your frozen face. And you've been in the photography business since how long?
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been we're going on about 12 years now total. Prior to that, I dabbled quite a bit, as we all tend to do. But I've been shooting professionally for about 12 years, and then full time for about the last 5 years.
Nice. And it's good that you're keeping busy. So fantastic. All right, so let's have a look in Capture One.
Sure.
Just want to check that your screen hasn't frozen as well. So if you move your mouse around for us. No, screen is great. That's good. Fantastic.
Great. Okay.
So it's just you, that's all, John, but Capture One working nicely. Excellent. All right, so what we're going to do in today's webinar is look at your styles, which there are 7 of, as you can see on the right-hand side of John's Capture One. So we're going to talk about those, and then we just run through a few image edits and so on and so forth. If you're just for the people out there, if your screen is frozen or anything like that, I'm actually watching on a completely separate feed to myself. So if you have any issues like a frozen screen, just refresh your browser, and of course if you are using Safari, then I would strongly recommend that you switch over to Chrome as well. That's going to give you a much better experience. So John, I see, who just popped up in the chat, I can see you're using Safari. So if you go over to Firefox or Chrome, you're going to have a much better experience. Also, John, and for the people out there as well, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A, and then we'll sneak into the Q&A every now and then when there's a break, and cover your questions as well. So John, first of all, let's talk about the styles. So there's 7 of them with colourful names. So what's the background on these guys?
Well, the background is that these are, going back even further, growing up, I spent a lot of time at the beach, surfing, fishing, just generally lounging and avoiding responsibility for the most part. And when I was approached by Capture One to create these, we decided that it would be sort of a great idea if the styles were based on some of my favorite beaches here on the West Coast.
Nice.
So the names of the beaches, the names of the styles represent beaches, 6 of them here in California, and one of them, style 6, is a beach on Oahu in Hawaii.
Very nice. Very nice. And in terms of building the styles, how do they sort of vary from one to the other?
Well, they're all based on a similar aesthetic, meaning that a lot of my work is beach based. I mean, here in Southern California, it's hard to avoid the beach as a matter of course. So the styles overall, the overall arc has a lot to do with the beach. When you dive into them a little bit further, you'll see that they vary in temperature and warmth, color. Some of the styles kind of highlight more warmth. Some of the styles highlight more of the overall tone. That sort of thing. It's always difficult to go in and sort of quantify something like that. But yeah. But yeah, they're fairly representative of the work I do on a daily basis. So I'm very happy with them. Yeah.
Excellent. And so how long have you been working on them for? Don't say 24 hours.
Well, it's 9:00 now, so I started them this morning. These are a culmination of several years, although I wasn't particularly working on them with the end goal being is to package them for Capture One. They're, the styles that I developed over the years, the personal style that I developed over the years, and then subsequently transferred into these 7 styles. Right. Probably, I would say I've been working towards this particular style for the last 2 years, year and a half, at least.
Nice one. Well, so they should be pretty fantastic then.
I hope so. I'm proud of them. So
good,
and they've gotten a good response. So I think so.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's take an image of your choice and let's run through the styles. And
sure.
If we go for something bare unedited, and let's just run through each of the styles, and maybe you can just talk about the kind of effect they give, or the color toning, or that kind of thing.
Certainly. Okay, so this photo that I'm starting with, can you see that I switched it, and I zeroed out all of the edits and everything. So this is a raw image straight out of the camera. This is my friend James on his sailboat. And basically, when I start with something like this, the first thing I'll do is evaluate the overall image, see if there's any exposure adjustments that I would do first. Typically, just based on the my exposure evaluation, I see it's a little bit overexposed. I would drop it down a little bit. I would then go over to white balance and sort of give that a little bit. It's probably a lot cooler than I want to be, so I'd manually raise it up. And already you can see the image is starting to take shape. And then from that point, once I adjust the white balance to where I want it and the exposure to where I want it, where it's a decent shot, even though it is still a little bit overexposed, then I would go and start looking at the styles. And then I would just kind of float through them a little bit and see what I was feeling at the moment. Some work very well, some work with a little bit of tweaking. For this particular image, I'm always torn because this is honestly one of my favorite photos. So I always want to use something that is kind of shows off just how much I love this photo. Without making it too, I don't want the toning to take away from the image, but at the same time, I want the image to complement. I want the toning and the style to complement the image. So, I love the first one. I think that's great. It kind of has a lot of mood, the way it kind of blows out his, his shoulder over here. But then, I scroll down a little bit, and then I love the way a more contrasty style looks, because then it starts to show it's less blown out. You can see more of him, and yet there's still a lot of mood. So for something like this, I'd probably go with number 6, and then I'd go back to the beginning, and I'd just sort of, maybe play with some of the sliders. I love, disclaimer or side note, I guess, to this is I've only there's going to be a lot of this. I've only recently discovered how wonderful the brightness slider is. For years prior that I've been using Capture One, I've used either the curve or I've used the exposure slider, but I was relatively recently introduced to the joy that is the brightness slider, and it's something I really have grown to appreciate.
So what do you like about it, or what do you find it does differently?
I just like that it the way it affects the image is different than the way the exposure slider or the way the curve and I can't, quite honestly, I can't go into all of the technical reasons why. I just know that because I just don't know the technical reasons why, but I do like using it. It affects exposure without kind of when you brighten it, it doesn't seem to blow out any of the highlights, and it doesn't kind of clip any of the shadows. And I'm pretty happy using it. Primarily, once I get my exposure set to where I want it, then I'll go into the brightness slider and I'll do some micro adjustments, and it always makes me very happy.
And the nice thing about the brightness is, or the brightness slider, and it's often one of those sliders that just gets ignored because, quite rightly, you don't really understand what it does, because terms like exposure, contrast, saturation are easy to understand. Brightness is not so quantifiable, but it's, as you've discovered, it's sort of a mid-tone adjustment as opposed to the whole range. So of course exposure will bring everything up or everything down, whereas brightness will center on those mid-tones up and down, which I hope is what you've discovered as well.
That it's fine. That is exactly what I discovered.
Good.
And thank you for putting into words what I so quickly failed at doing.
Well, as long as it's doing the right thing for you, then the technical explanation is neither here nor there, really. But
no, I totally agree. So from this point, in the editing or the toning, this first panel, to me, looks, everything looks like it's pretty good. I might at some point maybe, I love a warm image. It's an acquired taste for some people, and some people are very adamant about, white balance has to be, daylight 5500 inside. They have their set ideas or ideals of what they want. But for me, I just love a warm image, especially when it's nearing sunset, and especially when you kind of push it a little bit more. So I would warm this up to just where it's a little bit too much, and then I would switch over to the color editor or color balance, and from that point I'd start bringing a little bit more mid-tone color and a little bit more shadow color, just to kind of give the overall image a little bit more warmth and glow.
So interesting point, about styles in general is that, and it's the same with like all of the styles which we've made available and which we've asked people like yourself to produce, is that we don't necessarily advertise them as one-click wonders, but also that the style should be as universal as possible. So avoiding things like messing around with exposure sliders and white balance should not be part of the style as such. So and I think what you've done is create that style to give you a base look, but then you can build on from that as well, which is a good lesson, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think one of my learning experiences in creating these, and not when I say creating them, I mean I've had the style saved in some form in my Capture One for some of them have gone back a few years, but for me they've always been I apply them and then I go in and I tweak them. But then when I had to broaden it to a more general audience, or to a more general like user base, I realized that there were some things that just aren't they don't need to be, or they can't be on there as universal applications, the white balance being one and the exposure being one, because they affect images obviously differently. And so exposure, white balance, that sort of thing are separate from the styles.
Yeah,
and then
which is
super
important, because quite often you see a style on a website and think, wow, that looks amazing, and then you put it on your image and think, oh, it doesn't look anything like that. So
right. Oh yeah, and I'm absolutely guilty of that. I probably spent more time working backwards and trying to figure out where the fault in my my process was, and it was probably when I was saving the adjustments, probably saving all of them and then having to go back and undo things that didn't work for what worked for one image, but then didn't go and work for a second image.
Yeah,
or third,
exactly.
So on and so forth. But to agree with you, one of the things I really enjoy about these, and one of for me the selling points, not just for other people but for me as well, is that the styles aren't one click, done.
Yeah.
And I had a post on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago about that, and one of the things I wrote was, I've never been a preset person. The quote was, I've never really been a preset guy. And the reason for that was because I felt, as helpful as some of them can be, it was kind of a lazy approach to toning your photographs. And I think the one-click anything is never really a good approach to, especially a creative process like this.
For sure, yeah.
And saying it out loud, it makes total sense. Like, you're taking somebody else's work and applying it to yours and expecting it to be just out of the box done. But I think, what I appreciate about the Capture One styles, and not just my own, but others, is that you apply it, the style, and then you're free to go in and do as much as you want. So at the end of the editing session, at the end of the day, the style gave you a great starting point, and then you were able to make this image completely your own, by way of with toning and tweaking and so on. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well, let's look at another shot then, and
sure.
Yeah, let's go through the same process.
Okay.
It's funny because I've played with this image myself, that last one, and this, I don't know. This takes me to like Woodstock or something, like 1960s or whatever.
Oh, this one, yeah. It's funny. Sometimes I this whole photo set, we kind of shot in probably just about an hour or so, and I really wasn't. They were just sort of nice photos in a field, and she was super happy with the proofs that I showed her. And then as I started editing them, and as I started like playing around with the tones and all this kind of stuff, I realized we had some really, really nice vintage looking images. And it was really kind of took me by surprise, not in a bad way. Not that I was like, oh, look at how good this looks, but it was sort of like, oh wow, this is what's capable. This is what's and you can see like this was probably shot. This is the raw image. The white balance is too much. There's a color cast on everything from the green field. The exposure is okay, but once we started toning it and playing with it, once I started toning it and playing with it, it really sort of made the image stand out above some of the other shots that I'd done that week, or that day rather. So exposure, white balance is going to drop it real low.
So before you hit it with the styles, you just throw in some base corrections, yes?
In terms of
exposure and white balance, just to sort of give you I don't like saying the word correct, but a somewhat corrected start point, if you like.
I think correct is probably not the word I would use. I would say it gives me a good base, just because if I'm working on a set of images across a single shoot, or especially if I'm working on a set of images across an hour or whatever, I like to make sure that at least the exposure is sort of normalized, or and the white balance is sort of consistent. And I believe actually Capture One has a tool for that I
there is, yeah.
Some sort of normalization tool.
There is a normalize tool where you can equalize a color based on white balance, and it's quite successful for things like like a wedding workflow where skin tones have to match and those kinds of things, but it's not a way to, I guess, mathematically change color from one subject to another. But in a routine like a wedding workflow or a series of images, like if we had 30 of this lady now, slightly different lighting and locations, then yes, you could normalize one color aspect. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Actually, I'm always learning.
Yeah,
always learning. But yeah, so to go back to your question, I do sort of, I try to get exposure as perfect as I can in camera. Same with white balance. But in the course of a shoot, in the course of the sun changing, or we're in the shade, we're in the light, things happen. But yeah, I do like to hit kind of give myself a correct exposure and bring the white balance to something that's a little bit less dramatic than, but yeah, what I like about the white balance tool is if you hit the auto white balance, it gives you what Capture One thinks it should be, which is close to normal. And then from that point, you can kind of bring it up a little bit to bring some I want to say life back into the image, but it brings some color and brings some warmth back into the image. And that's always my first step. Whenever I'm working on photos, the first step is always to exposure and white balance. And then from that point, then I go to the styles and I start to look to see what works. And even just scrolling through these now, you can see some of them work right off the bat. Gives us a nice, soft, kind of vintagey feel. Some of them are a little too contrasty, so I'd have to go in a little too color heavy. I'd have to go in and make some changes. For this particular image, the Style 5 Venice Beach is my favorite, and it almost kind of works right out of the box, or right out of the gate. But then I would just go in and kind of play with it a little bit, raise the shadow, maybe drop the brightness a little bit, and then contrast and play with even the exposure to bring that up. And then some other general tweaks. I do love a low contrast image. It's funny how sometimes you go through stages.
You definitely do, yeah.
Right? Yeah, and I wonder, because I see some other photographers and their work is consistent across years and years, and then I look at some of my own work over the course of a year, and I see the phases that I've gone through, and some of them I'm like, oh, I should return to that, and some of them I just sort of slap my forehead and say, oh man,
what was I doing?
Thinking? Yeah. And then drop the saturation a bit, just because I felt like it's a little too much, and kind of gives that vintagey feel. The curve is set up. Well, I don't really have much. Yeah, no, I'm pretty happy with how this was. I would probably at this point I don't want to take too much away from it, but I do love a desaturated image.
Yeah, that's where that's where I tend to lean. But as you say, it does change with the safaris, with the seasons, I suppose, and your mood, and yeah, you definitely go through periods. Yeah,
exactly. And then the other aspect of it is, this is a constant learning. Photography, at least, is and color grading and editing and all that stuff. It's nonstop learning. So there are tools that I've used for years that I have become outdated, that I've moved to something new, which I'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
But it's taken my work to a completely different level, just because what was not available, or what was not possible a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago, is now suddenly I'm able to go in and do it simply within a couple of clicks. For example, the advanced color editor, which absolutely love using for many, many reasons. What I was introduced to earlier this year, or late last year, is the plugin.
The preset we made.
Yes.
The HSL preset. Yes.
HSL preset, absolutely. I was introduced to that, and it has changed how I use this tool, because it's made it much more straightforward, at least for me.
I should probably explain what that is, shouldn't I?
Yes.
So I guess you can say in the basic tool tab of the color editor, there is some simple colors, 6 or 7 simple colors in the basic tab, where you can manipulate. Yeah, if you click on it for us, John, thanks. Yeah, so 6 or 7 basic tones which you can manipulate the hue, saturation and lightness. But what we found, they behave quite differently to Lightroom does. So of course, if you're used to using Lightroom and you come to Capture One and you go to the basic tab, then what you see there doesn't behave similar. So what we did is that we created the HSL preset, which kind of loads up a load of predefined ranges in the advanced tab, and this way you can kind of get a similar experience. So what I'll do is, while in the sort of next half hour while John's still talking, I will go and find that blog post, and then I'll put it in the chat room so you guys can play with it. So I mean, John, if you just flick through some of those different color tones, then that just gives various different options for changing reds, yellows, greens, blues, and so on. But as you said, it works a bit nicer than what the basic tab does.
Yeah, I agree. It's changed the way I view this tool. It's changed the way I tone my images. It's much more of a direct. It's a direct tool for me that you go in and say, I want to change the reds. You can. I mean, obviously, that's not something I would do here. There's really not that many reds, but but you have the control. If I wanted to change on some of the yellows, drop down the color of the grass just a little bit, desaturate the grass. It's and then you can, if you click on that, you can see what you're affecting. So the color, the parts of the image that you're affecting will remain in color, while the parts of the image you're not affecting will turn black and white.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet to use. And of course, any of those ranges in the advanced tab can be made bigger and smaller and so on. I mean, if you're new to the color editor, I would say don't be scared of it. Just watch 1 or 2 color editor tutorials and you'll find it really straightforward and super powerful. But the HSL preset that we made is a great way to just start exploring it and see how it works.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's very, very powerful.
Okay, I'll let you finish this image, and then I've got a couple of questions I'm going to throw at you as well.
Okay. From this point, I think, I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm saying it's probably 98% done. There's really nothing. Skin tone looks good. There's a little bit of a highlight that I'm probably not 100% happy with, but that's the nature of things. Real minimal adjustments at this point. Bring the brightness up to affect the midtones. It kind of gives her a little bit more of a rim, or accentuates the rim light of the sun. A little bit warmer, just to bring some life back to her cheeks. Probably. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. This is okay. I like this.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to see if you're still frozen. Let's see. Yep, you're still frozen.
Still frozen.
So that's all right. I'll be a lot more animated. So a couple of questions I'm just going to pick out. So let's see here in the Q&A. You can't see these, John, so don't worry. Okay. James was asking, your styles, do they affect anything in the exposure tab? I can't remember if you use contrast slider at any point or anything like that.
We can actually take a look. So I can back this out.
Let's get your screen back up 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm in control. I have master control of everything that John's broadcasting. So yeah, we can see your screen now.
Okay, so this is backed out. I just adjusted the white balance. There's nothing affected here. No other nothing else is done. So then I'm just going to apply the style. I'll put this one. We'll go with this one. I like this. So it drops the contrast. This one in particular, contrast and saturation. I know some of the other ones affect contrast and saturation as well. What doesn't get affected in any of the styles is the exposure slider and the brightness slider. Those are completely up to the individual user. The exposure is left alone, and the brightness is left alone as well. And as is the white balance.
Exposure shouldn't be used in a style, really. That's a corrective adjustment, and as well as white balance. So you're changing things like contrast, brightness. You're doing some tweaks in the color editor. You're changing potentially sliders in the high dynamic range tool and curves as well. So there's a lot going on each style, but as we saw in the first edit, you can still build on from that as well. And I think that's or you don't have to build on from it. 1 click, job done. but I would say don't feel that you can't tweak them as well.
Yeah. I would say for the most part, there's there. Well, I mean, I think you answered the question. We both answered the question. Yeah, there. Some of them can be one click and done. Others definitely would require at least some tweaking. And I think that's just the nature of anything, really.
Yeah.
Nature of each individual images.
And there was a good question from Elliot, and he says, "Am I correcting in assuming that one can make corrections either before or after applying a style? Appears to be no obvious advantage to either approach." And I think that's true. I think you could, like you've done, fix exposure white balance and then put the style on, or you could throw the style on and then start adjusting. But for me, I don't think either way, one way is better than the other. So I don't know what your thoughts is, John. But
I agree with you. I don't think there's one way that's better than the other.
No.
However, just as we just saw, there are a couple of things that are affected by the individual style. So if you go in prior to applying a style and you adjust, for example, the curve, you adjust the contrast, the saturation, dynamic range, color editor, and then you apply the style, you're going to have some of those settings apply from the style rather than what you had done before that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Okay. And almost last but not least, do you ever use styles after raw conversion? So Seth says he's been enjoying using them on PSD files. Obviously not as much latitude as raw, but still quite useful.
Interesting. I have not explored that, and I feel like I should possibly give that a try. After the conversion, they're in TIFF format, and I know TIFF format is editable, but not. It doesn't give you the latitude that obviously a raw file does. So I tend to try to do everything, and the same thing with the JPEG. I try to do everything in raw format, or at least the initial image in Capture One.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I don't know if that answered the question. Yeah.
No, it does. It does, and it's
Okay.
and it's often people think, well, I shouldn't put a style on anything but the raw. But as you said, it was Seth, wasn't it, who was asking? I think. Where is it?
Yeah.
Yes, it was Seth. And there isn't as much latitude, but if the style is more a subtle style, then there's no reason why you can't. And the benefit of doing that is we're going to have up David and Frozen John again. The benefit of doing that, if you have your finished image and you put like the PSD and you put the style on it, and then of course thereafter you could maybe add some grain, or you could make a variant and do a different style, whereas your PSD has kind of all the retouching intact, if you've done retouching, of course. So you have your sort of PSD, and then you can have different variants in Capture One with different styles as well. So that's kind of an option as well. So yeah, Seth, it's interesting to explore, definitely.
And that's one of the things I like about it, is that it's so versatile. You can pretty much, it's experiment with everything, and eventually you'll come to a good solid workflow, whether it's with the raw files or the TIFF or the DNG or PSD files.
Yeah. And Max, I think, was asking, it was more a tech question, that he didn't seem to be able to add styles as layers. I mean, that's just a simple right click on the style and add to a layer. I don't know if that's something you're doing yourself, John, but it does give you that extra flexibility option too.
Oh, it does for sure. And you can apply it to the background, apply it to new layer. It's definitely there. It is something I've played with, and it's something that I'm still at this point, I'm still learning how to apply it, because sometimes I'd like to mask out some things, and if something is overly shadowed and I want to brighten up just a certain area or darken a certain area, then apply the style to it, or apply the style to the whole image.
And And it also increases the versatility of the style, because if you throw a style on an image and you reject it because it's maybe a bit too strong, that same style at 50% opacity, could actually work really, really nicely. So
that's actually a great point. That's probably my favorite thing about applying stuff with layers, is that you can adjust the opacity.
Absolutely. And Christina actually said in the chat, as a newbie photographer, it's great that your style and preferences can change, which is true. I'm sure that we should look at some of your first work, say, John, and see how it's progressed.
It's amazing. All of my work up until this week was accidentally deleted.
What?
No, I'm just kidding. No, that's because my first work when I was learning was basically just that. It's stuff that will probably never again see the light of day, just because it was a work in progress. And I feel like as a photographer and also as a professional, I've progressed to a point where looking back at the old work or posting the old work it doesn't really serve much of a purpose, other than saying, look how far we've come. But yeah, a lot of that old work is, I mean, to be frank, a lot of that old work is just bad. It's just bad. Yeah. There was a lot of learning that took place.
We're also the master of our own, or our biggest critic.
Right. And I think, that's actually a good point. And I just want to correct myself there. And a lot of my early work wasn't, I wouldn't say bad. It was just, I think as we grow as artists and as we grow as professionals, and our tastes maybe evolve. So I think that's probably a better answer, and a more truthful answer is, looking back at old work. Yeah. In addition to everything that we learn along the way, in terms of process, workflow, etc.
Cool. Let's have a look at another shot then before we send everyone to sleep. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go. I mean, I'm glad everybody's hanging on so far. I appreciate it.
Doing well.
I love this image. I feel like this is pretty straight out of the box. It's already one of my favorite images, just raw straight out of camera. There's really not much. Applying the styles really just sort of. This one I think does need a little some tweaking. So let me go back and just see. Okay, so we have that one. And we'll just go from here. Okay, so obviously very orangey, very yellow, very contrasty, too warm. We'll bring down the. Oh, and you know what? Let me step backwards just a bit. I spent the last 45 minutes telling everyone about my process, and then the first thing I did was skip my first two steps that I told everybody about.
Okay,
so
what are those?
I applied the style without doing the white balance or the exposure. So as the white balance, it will drop it down to a more manageable level. Skin tones are more natural, that sort of thing. But I tend to like a warm image, so I bring it up a little bit, and already it's looking great. The exposure is pretty spot on, which is a great thing. And then from this point, after I have the white balance, after I have the exposure, I would go over to the styles and then scroll through them. And already just looking at it, it fits better than it did before I made those two first adjustments. So we'll go over here. We'll drop this down because apparently I was a little overzealous in my warming up of the image. Bring that up. Contrast is way down. I love a low contrast image, but I also love a high contrast image. It's somewhere I don't quite understand. I think bring the highlight down a little bit just to bring in some detail again. Shadow is down. And then we have the advanced, and you can see the adjustments here were made, which affect the red affects her lips, the orange is skin tone, yellow. We have the highlight and some of the skin tone, green. Not much green in the image except for the flare, actually, and some of the, I think that's moss on the wall. Not really any blue, and definitely no purple or, I'm going to say pink, but I know there's probably a technical color term.
The technical name for pink, good question, yeah.
It's like indigo or some,
yeah.
So then I turn this off, and yeah, I mean, I would probably bring this into Photoshop, do just some minimal skin work, just to kind of clean it up a little bit. I would remove these, maybe remove these people over here on the beach just for the sake of consistency in the background. And in the past, I've worked on this image so many times. I've cropped it in so many different ways. At one point, I had a square crop on it, which I love, but I kind of, oops, that was way too close. These days, I really am enjoying just the regular in-camera crop, or the full-size image, I mean. So yeah, I think at this point, the image would be probably about 90% done, other than what I would just take in Photoshop.
So if you summarize what is your sort of Photoshop work, I guess, or where do you stop in Capture One and in Photoshop, are you just restricted to retouching work, or is there further colors things going on and other editing?
It's actually, I would say is probably, in terms of color, it's probably 95% Capture One. In Photoshop, I tend to use the what is that? The color balance, maybe to bring some blue into the shadows, or depending. It really goes by an image by image basis or a shoot by shoot basis. But in terms of skin, I do a lot of my skin retouching in Photoshop, just because it's been part of my workflow for such a long time. It's I don't overly retouch the skin, I don't think, but I am more comfortable just kind of giving it a once over in Photoshop, because it is something that I've been using for such a long time. But yeah, and then in terms of anything else, it's pretty much all Capture One at this point.
Excellent. I'm just having a quick check on the questions to see if anything new came in. No, I think we answered most of that. Oh no, it was Elliot, that's all right, who wanted to show quickly. Can you just show in the styles and presets tool just the command where you can save a style?
Sure.
Yeah.
So
how
this
I
is
do assuming you've taken an image, you've applied some corrections, and you think, I want to save this as a style.
Yep.
So.
Okay, so what I do, and I know there's probably a way to do this directly from the save user style. But what my part of workflow is I go to adjustments, styles, and then down to save user style, and then make sure you have the options of, it's almost like the clipboard tool. You can check and uncheck different parts of what you want to save as part of the style,
which is super important.
Very.
Because you might have tweaked exposure on that image, but you don't want it to be part of that style. So that window, often people just click through it, but it's really worth having a quick look. Think, oh, hang on a minute. Yes, I did have an exposure tweak on there, so I should take that off.
Right, and then that's exactly what I would do. I would unclick exposure, unclick brightness, make sure white balance is unclicked, color balance, is unchecked. Color editor advanced. I'm sorry, color balance I would leave checked. Color editor basic unchecked. Color editor advanced checked. And then everything else is pretty much unchecked, except for sharpening, clarity, structure, grain. If I'm happy with the grain, I tend to add grain afterwards because some images it affects differently than others.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I would just save it. And then in the styles folder, whatever folder, and then, and I still apologize if you guys can hear they're doing work outside the house, clearing bushes. If you can hear I'm so sorry. There was not scheduled for today. I guess they showed up to do it.
Nothing's coming through from me, but you're only on quiet.
Amazing. So. Okay. It sounds like they're chopping down a tree right next to my window here. So I'm glad nobody can hear it.
It generally happens just about before I'm going to start doing a webinar. There's actually a parking lot just near the window. And of course, generally that's the time when somebody needs to trim a hedge, turn on a leaf blower, all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly. They must know each other because the guys outside are doing it right now.
Yeah.
One guy has a leaf blower, one guy has a chainsaw, and they're okay. So good. I'm glad nobody can hear how noisy it is outside. So then I would save or label the style, and then one of the things also is I'm going to back up just a second because if I did want to. Or if I did accidentally save the exposure and white balance, when I hit save, it comes up with some warnings. It says it's not recommended to include the following adjustments, since they may not apply well to the images of a different type, which I totally agree with. And if you go back and uncheck white balance, this warning will not come up. And then you just save it and you have your style.
Yep, and then it pops up in user styles, and that's it. Yeah. Oh, there was a question earlier on actually about can you make a favorites folder for styles, which you can. It's a bit sort of. I will be the first to admit it's a little bit hacky the way you do it because you have to do it in the Finder or in the Mac Explorer. So. Probably rather than me trying to remember and explain the location is, if whether you're on Mac or PC, I'm just going to put me on screen and Frozen John for a second. When you save your style, you'll see, so that Finder window pops up or Windows Explorer window pops up, you will see the path where the styles are saved in Mac or Windows. And then what you can do is look at where that folder is. On Mac, it's in the application support folder. It's the app data folder on Windows. And then you can actually subdivide up that area with like my favorite styles and so on. So if you do it that way, then it's easy to find. Okay, so let's put just John's screen back up again. I was just looking. Oh yeah, lots of people, or I say lots, a few, asked about the moon icon in your toolbar because, of course, that is not a standard tool set. So that is I mean, you've got a couple of custom tool tabs there, which is great because that's the whole point of Capture One, that you can customize. So what's in the Moon tool tab?
So it's probably one of my favorite things about Capture One. A lot of times when I share a screen cap or a session like this, I always get questions is, why is your Capture One backwards? And I don't know if it's being left-handed or if it's being just backwards in general, but I really, really like having the tool tabs on the same side as my mouse hand, my trackpad hand. Yeah, so it just sort of, it's very, for me, it's one movement. I can look, and I'm not crossing my body to look at anyhow, it's probably more of a personal issue than anything else. But that said, so these are all customizable. I have my folders. I have my, basically what I do when I do a fresh reinstall of Capture One, or I'm redoing the workspace or something like that, I'll go and I'll zero out everything and I'll build it back up from the tools that I use the most per panel. So to answer your question, it's my color editor, color balance tools. And basically you can add a tool tab, custom tool tab, and I can name this one David. And then I can select icons. And I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can do a hammer, a heart, a moon, a star, a sun, a paper, a trowel for some reason.
Yeah, it's an eclectic set of icons, that's for sure.
It really is. It's almost like a children's cereal, marshmallows from children's cereal. A setting sun and a stack of papers. I chose the moon. I'm not quite sure why. It's probably just the first thing that stuck out to me. But yeah, that's the moon icon. This black and white crop with my styles. This is for when I'm tethering. This is all the stuff that I need. This is a clipboard. When you hit Shift Command C to copy something, it populates it with everything every adjustment that you've made. The sun here is just my metadata, my process recipes. I don't use this all that often, but I'm glad that it's there for when I do use it. And then my layers tab with some of the tools that are repeated just for ease of use, so I don't have to constantly be flipping back and forth if I add a layer and I just wipe out.
And that's a good tip, that you can have the same tool in multiple different tool tabs. So I have a layers tool in the color tool tab, the exposure tool tab, and the details tool tab. So those 3 default. So I can always go to levels if I need to. But no 2 people work the same. Some people would think that would be completely an insane thing to do, but that's the whole point of customization. So
yeah, and I have the rotation and flip tool in a few different places because I'm not going to, I have it here in the crop tab. I have it here in the exposure tab. And it's just easy. It's one of the things I use often. So it's just nice to have it where I happen to be instead of having to click back and forth.
Sure. Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll answer a couple more questions.
Sure.
And then we're actually out of time. So,
okay.
Let's see. Couple of techie ones. Let's see. Brandon, we answered yours. So that was about adding your favorite styles into a favorites folder. So hang on, I'm just going to bring me up on screen, John, and Frozen John again. So as I said, when you save your style, look at the path of where that style is saved, and then you can subdivide that area into different folders, restart Capture One, and then you'll see them arranged. So, and also Pascal's question, say if you've saved all these kind of modifications for Capture One, like workspaces and so on, again, that location where the styles are saved is the same location where workspaces are saved, presets and so on. So you can copy that whole folder and just keep that as a backup, and then you can always restore Capture One if you're going to a new machine or your machine explodes or whatever. So you can always do that. Okay, John, and I'm just checking for a other question. I think we pretty much got most of the ones. And David, he was asking if you import the same style twice. Done that myself many times.
Oh, absolutely.
That same location, you can just delete the style pack. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And controversial question. I'm going to let you answer that, John.
Okay.
Because I don't want to answer it. But it's a really good one, and it's a good way to wrap up, actually, which is, doesn't using styles negate your creative ability?
That's a great question. I feel like we kind of addressed that a little bit earlier, but I'll answer this specifically. I don't necessarily agree. I don't think it negates any creativity. I think what it does, probably the benefit of it is probably consistency.
Yes.
It allows you to have a similar look across a wide range of images, whether it's images from the same shoot, images from a couple of different shoots, or what have you. And I think one of the differences, and we touched upon this before, one of the differences between...
John, can you hear us a second?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, we lost your sound briefly. 1 second.
Oh, all right.
Hang on, I'm just going to write in the chat window. Hang on, guys. 1 moment. Oh, it's back. Say something else, John.
Something else, John.
Yeah, let's see. Hang on. I'm just going to check on my feed. Okay, say something else again.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I think so.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think it was just a little small internet outage. So just rewind to why it's okay to use styles for creativity.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So it's funny because while the sound went out, I was giving the meaning of life and the secret to happiness.
We never get that back. Yeah.
Nope, never. So I just real quick, the styles versus the presets. I think presets themselves limit creativity because you're selling mass-produced similar styles that really don't take into account individual tweaking here and there.
Right.
The Capture One styles are, at least in my opinion, and I know I share this opinion with a few other people, are dependent upon the individual user tweaking the tools, using the tools to create a look or to bring about something that they're really happy with. And in that sense, it doesn't limit creativity. In fact, I think it facilitates creativity.
Sure.
At least for me, and what I tell people is when I was developing these specifically for Capture One and kind of honing in what I had, going back and sort of looking at what I would do in my workflow and then kind of putting it together into a package, it allowed me, or it forced me actually to learn the tools, to learn how to use Capture One in a more professional sense, in a more consistent sense, and in a more in-depth sense. Whereas I was using tools that I hadn't used before, but I was also using tools that I had used, but in a much more thorough way. So in that sense, I feel like I finally hit my stride in terms of editing and toning my own photos, because the creativity was inspired. Whereas back in the day when I was using presets, there's a pretty popular film preset for Lightroom that I was using. I was slapping it on there, and some images I was super happy with, and I go, yeah, this looks great. Other images I said, it doesn't work. Image must be not that good. So Capture One has allowed me to, Capture One styles and creating these styles has allowed me to explore that and kind of deepen my understanding and my creativity.
Good. Excellent. There you go, David.
Yeah.
So that was David who was asking that. Oh, yeah, and Desmond's just reminded me I need to put something in the chat. So I'm going to put two things in. First of all, most importantly, is the link to the styles themselves. So that's the first thing. The second thing is also the blog, which had I've just got to find it, the HSL preset that you spoke about before.
Oh, yes.
Let me just find that one. It's an older one, but it's still perfectly acceptable. Let's see. Or very useful. It's a switching from Lightroom blog, and you want to look at point number 5. So let's just post that. So another link coming in. So I'm going to put point number 5 in big capital letters, and that's the one you want to look at. And there's a download there, so you can play around with that HSL. So it's like. So you've got the basic color editor, you've got the advanced color editor. This is the intermediate color editor, I would say. So it just gives you more sort of points to play around with, and works really well. So fantastic. All right, John, you're still there, aren't you?
I am still here. Yeah, and I'm sorry that I've been frozen this whole time.
Yeah, I know.
I feel terrible.
I've put you back up on screen again. So the good news is, as I said, it was a flattering freeze. So
Oh, good. Wouldn't it be funny if I wasn't frozen and I was actually just really still the whole
yeah,
time?
that would be impressive. Yeah, yeah. So and there's nothing embarrassing going on in the background or anything like that. So I
No,
think we
thankfully.
got away with it. Yeah, for sure. So
Perfect.
it'll be on the recording too, so you can
Oh,
see yourself frozen in delight. And as for the recording, that will be up on our Learning Hub tomorrow. So you'll get an email when it's all ready to go. Probably tomorrow. Worst case, it will be Monday. And then you'll receive an email saying, hey, the recording is ready. You can go and watch it once more. So thanks again for this time, John, as well. And also
of course.
for everyone listening in. And as I said, I hope, apart from Frozen John, on my test system, the monitor looked pretty good with a nice feed coming through, except for that minor hiccup at the cliffhanger when we were talking about styles. So, yeah.
Yep.
All right, and
It's always the case. Yeah.
you're shooting in like 25 minutes, aren't you, John? So we better let you
Yeah,
go.
I believe so. It's 10 after 10. Yeah, any minute we should get here. They
Yeah.
should get here. So it's always, it's always the way. If it
LA
wasn't like
models.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. And
LA John.
next webinar, just Max was asking, that's next week, and that's all about black and white. So if you want to know about black and white, we could throw a few styles in there as well. Then you can join up next week and see that. And that's all the webinars are also on the Learning Hub as well. So the link you'll get to watch the recording, all the webinars are there. So recorded and upcoming, they're all in the same place. So it's very easy to find. So thanks again, John, for spending your time with us today, and we'll
My
see
pleasure.
you all again soon. Cheers, John.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah,
Take,
cheers.
take care. See you soon. Bye.
David, you still there?